$1.5 billion to use this as a way to leverage the extraordinary creativity that has been built on the net using digital technologies into the weapon necessary to change the dynamic that exists with proprietary content. Well, good. Now, there are many people who question the particular structure of licenses that we've built. Some suggest that we've compromised on important free software values in the particular mix of licenses that we've built. I think this is an extraordinarily important conversation and criticism to consider. And I wanted to spend a couple minutes in this audience, maybe the only audience in the world that is enough aware about these issues to actually care at all about them, but to explain a little bit about why I don't think there's a compromise, or more strongly, why there's a principle behind the particular mix that we have adopted. So first, what do our licenses do? Well, you know, I have a 3-year-old, so this is the way I think these days. Here's a simple puzzle to put together what Creative Commons licenses are about. There are 2 kinds of freedoms out there: the freedom to share and the freedom to remix. And we've introduced 2 kinds of limitations on those freedoms, conditions on the freedoms. One is a non-commercial condition. You can do it so long as it's for non-commercial purposes. And the other is standard copyleft, share-alike condition. You can do it so long as derivatives of what you do are licensed in a similarly free way. So using these buttons, you can begin to get a sense of the kind of licenses that we enable. So you could say, I want to enable sharing. That gives you this license that says sharing, no derivatives. I want to enable remix. That gives you what we call the sampling license. I want to enable sharing and remix. That's the freest license. It's just like the Apache license. It just says, give us attribution. And then you can begin to impose conditions on it. I want to say, you can share and remix, but for non-commercial purposes, or you can share and remix as long as it's share-alike. Or you could actually, in some cases, actually say both share and remix and non-commercial limitation and share-alike limitation. Now, there are many people who say the only licenses that we should be giving are licenses like these, licenses that say you can share and remix with a copyleft restriction, or licenses that say you can share and remix with no restriction. And the strongest point of this criticism is we definitely should not be including the option to limit people for non-commercial purposes. Now, the important thing to recognize about this debate is there's a very obvious echo with the debate around the birth of free software. If free software is, as I believe it is, the Free Software Foundation's definitions of the 4 freedoms, the freedom to run, to study, to redistribute, and to improve software, there's a world of software that is free in that sense. BSD licensed software is an example of that, Apache licensed software. These are licenses that basically simply require a kind of attribution. They are licenses that essentially, from an economic perspective, say we don't care about copyright. We want recognition, but we don't care about exercising copyright to extract any value from how you use our work. Then there's another important set of free licenses that are copyleft licenses. These are licenses that, of course, respect those 4 freedoms, that they add a single condition. Modifications that are distributed must be distributed under the same license. That's what the GPL requires. Now, when people look at this restriction, condition, limitation, not limitation or inconsistent with the 4 freedoms, but still a limitation, they say, why is it necessary? Why is it there? And this argument points to values, or you could say pragmatic concerns about the need to get buy-in in the community of people who will be creating for the software project. So, as Linus Torvalds says, a kind of golden rule idea applies here, that you do unto others as you want them to do unto you, so you make your work available so long as they agree to be making their work available in the same way. And many people believe that this condition is necessary to avoid what we could think of as a kind of free riding. People who freely ride on the creativity of others without contributing anything back. And the reason that's important is, at least some people believe, if the free riding is allowed, there will not be enough free software made. If free riding in this sense is allowed, people say, to hell with it. Why should I put my work out there like this if other people are just going to take it? I won't. And so the creation of free software will be restricted unless the free riding is eliminated, or at least some forms of that free riding eliminated. Now, in that debate between the BSD kinds and the GPL types, of course, the BSD and Apache types say, look, we don't need that restriction to get all the free software that we want. People will produce free software anyway without worrying about any of these restrictions. They don't care about free riding. There'll be enough of it without imposing this copyleft requirement. GPL's answer to that is, well, more than 80% of the free software projects out there have adopted GPL. That's pretty good evidence that they think that they need it. They need this protection against free riding. Now, the thing I want you to see is that same struggle, that same debate exists in the context of free content. In the free content licenses that we've got in Creative Commons, of course, we've got something equivalent to the Apache license. That's just the attribution license. Copy, remix, so long as you give attribution. And we have something equivalent to the copyleft license. That's the BySA license that says, if you make derivatives, you've got to make these derivatives licensed under the same license. But what we've added, and what's have caused a lot of the concern here, is a condition that says, you can use my work as long as you use it only for non-commercial purposes. So why that additional restriction? And the short answer is, many words on the screen here, for some culture, some forms of culture, share alike is not a protection against free riding. Share alike is not a protection against the kind of free riding that would lead many people to say they don't want to make work available for this kind of use. For example, think about a musician. Takes a song, records a song, puts it out there under a license that says, copy left, BySA. Could Sony take that song and stamp it on a CD and sell the CD without copylefting the other songs, without doing anything to contribute back to that creator's work? Answer is absolutely, Sony could do that. Because copyleft gets triggered upon making a derivative. And making a derivative is not what you do when you put something on a CD, it's when you change it, transform it, add some creative work to it. So the point is, for songs, if you put your work out there in a copyleft way, there's no reason why companies like Sony couldn't just take the work and make it available for free. I think that's true for music. I think it's also a big problem in the context of photographs. In the Flickr community, many examples now of newspapers, magazines, just taking Flickr content and just republishing it. And republishing it without even giving attribution. Now, if that content is licensed under a copyleft license, there's no problem with that. Because all they're doing is making a copy. They're not making a derivative. So there's no limitation on magazines to do this. And the concern is that many in the photographic community would say, well, this isn't fair. They're not giving anything back for what they're taking from me. So the point is, share alike does not chill enough free riding for at least some forms of culture. Now, you can say in response, so what? Who cares? This Sony CD with music on it under a Creative Commons license would be competing with free versions of that CD. So it's not like Sony's going to make tons of money because always the market is competing with them. And that's true, right? It's effectively the case that copyright has been eliminated here. But the point to recognize is that same point can be made against the GPL. You can say against the GPL, look, the GPL could remove its free rider shield, the copyleft component. It could say, yeah, go ahead, copy, make derivatives, do whatever you want. You have no obligation to contribute back to the community. It could do that. It would still be competing with free versions. So you'd have GPL code out there that would be competing with free versions of other GPL code and proprietary versions if someone free wrote in exactly this sense. But my point to enter the debate here is, if you don't believe that GPL ought to be removing this free rider shield, then why should we eliminate non-commercial as a free rider shield, at least in those places where this is the only effective shield against free riding. Right? So my point is, if free riding is a problem, and you might not think it's a problem, that's perfectly credible. You can be a BSD guy or an Apache person. But if it's a problem, at least with some forms of creative expression, we should say, like software, wikis, and film, share alike is enough, and I push share alike, copy left in all of those contexts. I think we need to recognize that some forms of expression, photographs, music, maybe even text, it might not be enough to avoid the kind of free riding that motivated the initial creation of something like the GPL. If it's legitimate to avoid free riding here, then we need to use the tool appropriate to that end, and my suggestion is that non-commercial at least is that such a tool at least sometimes. Now, it may be that the way we phrase this, characterize this as non-commercial, is just the wrong word. Because when I think about it, all that I'm thinking about is how do we make sure that people don't exploit others so that they don't want to play in the game of creating free culture for people to use. But the aim here, I think, is legitimate, at least as legitimate as avoiding free riding with software. We need tools to encourage, as my colleague Yochai Benkler says, a world where people share nicely, encouraging this shared economy. And as with this set of tools, we can imagine something, the BMI response, balancing the proprietary economy, that has as its focus destroying the tools that would make this creativity possible. I'm going to make one more general point about this. So the history of the free software struggle has been a history of a struggle about defining the freedom that's appropriate for software. The importance of that struggle is the importance that comes from a struggle of a community. It's a process by which people came to understand what freedom in software required, and that process was as important as a particular result. Now, it's my view that we need that same struggle elsewhere, in other forms of creative communities, among musicians, among photographers, among filmmakers. These people, and scholars especially, need to engage the same struggle so that they understand as well as software creators do. Through this process of defining what freedom is appropriate, they have to have the understanding about what's freedom is appropriate for them. What this process does not need is dictates from us, orders from us, definitions from us about what freedom is. From us, from outsiders, at least to those of us who don't live in these other creative communities. For those of us who live outside these communities, they don't need this word from us. This sort of word from us, telling them what freedom is, will be heard by them rightfully as a kind of imperialism, an American-branded imperialism, if you like, but it's imperialism. It's telling them what the right answer is, without giving them the chance they need to define in the way the free software movement did. We should take as much time to encourage that debate, because that debate among these creative communities will include much more than whatever was at stake in the context of software. Much more, and ultimately much more important. Now, this is a story I've told a bunch of times. Let me tell it one more time here. In 1906, this man, John Philip Sousa, traveled to this place, United States Congress, to talk about this technology, what he called the, quote, talking machines. John Philip Sousa was not a fan of the talking machines. This is what he had to say. These talking machines are going to ruin the artistic development of music in this country. When I was a boy, in front of every house in the summer evenings, you would find young people together singing the songs of the day or the old songs. Today, you hear these infernal machines going night and day. We will not have a vocal cord left, Sousa said. The vocal cords will be eliminated by a process of evolution, as was the tale of man when he came from the ape. Now, it's this picture I want you to focus on.